Hi, I'm Leslie DeTrani,
Hi, I'm Lan Huynh.
and we're here from the Alliance of Business Immigration Lawyers to talk to you about green cards. Green cards for skilled or unskilled workers, workers that could be here in the United States or even abroad.
Right.
So tell us, I know this is a favorite subject of yours about like why this is such a versatile option
Right.
for employers.
I think we're going to focus on the fact that employers use the PERM labor certification as the most optimal or most popular option to sponsor foreign national workers. And I think there's a misconception that employers only can sponsor individuals who are currently here in the US, working in the US. And really, they can sponsor the worker from anywhere. They can be outside of the US or in the US. And that's what we want to make sure everyone understands. You don't have to be currently in the US in order to be sponsored for lawful permanent resident by an employer. It may take a long time, though, in order to come to the US through the sponsorship of an employer through the PERM labor certification process, but you can definitely be sponsored while you're abroad by an employer. It just takes a long time to get that status.
So if, an employer, and whether it's a hospital or an educational institution or a small employer or a corporation or a mom and pop shop, anyone can sponsor a worker through the PERM process for a green card, whether they're here or not.
Correct, but you just said something that I have to kind of also provide a caveat for. So we're going to talk about the PERM process, which is usually when an employer sponsors an employee for any type of position by filing a labor cert, by establishing that there are no qualified, willing, able U.S. worker in the U.S. to fill the position. They have to test the labor market and file a labor cert with the Department of Labor. But there
and
is
the wage.
Yes,
and the wage
there
piece.
are a lot of other steps that you have to go through, but there is another process. And the reason I want to share this with you is because you mentioned hospitals. There's a Schedule A labor cert process for nurses, for example, where an employer can sponsor nurses by filing a I-140 immigrant petition and bypassing filing a PERM labor cert and sponsoring them for an immigrant petition.
That's a really good point, right?
And
Because
so I
it's a
want to
long
share that
process.
because Leslie brought up hospitals, because it's a shorter process than going through the PERM labor cert. The PERM labor cert can take about, right now, 2 years, but
From beginning to end.
from beginning to end. But there are situations we know where an individual may not be able to come into the US. They may be in a refugee camp, or they may not be able to get a non-immigrant visa to come in to work in the US because there's just not a visa category available for that individual. They may be, let's say, their occupation is a cook. I've brought in cooks from the Middle East, let's say, and there's not a visa category that you can bring in a Afghani cook, for example, but you can file a labor cert for that cook, and it will take a long time before you can bring that individual in under that labor cert to get them an immigrant visa.
But if you're an employer and you know what your needs are going to be and you have people identified, it's a wonderful way to skip over trying to get someone here temporarily. It's kind of the ultimate solution.
It is that is the golden ticket, right? For anyone who wants to immigrate to the US, is to get the green card. And you can just go straight to it. It just takes a long time, and you want to get the right counsel to help you navigate through the process. But it's definitely a great solution. And
for employers. Let's also talk about, because employees often come with spouses and children, right? So talk a little bit about how the whole family gets to.
They can't. I mean, once you sponsor a foreign national for the green card, and they're able to get it, and you're able to get the immigrant visa for, let's say, my Afghani cook, who will come to work at a restaurant to cook Afghani food. He or she can bring the children, the spouse over, along.
Children meaning under 21.
Under 21
so,
years old, as part of the immigrant visa petition. So you bring the whole family over as part of derivative beneficiaries of the immigrant petition.
And then if people are fleeing crisis situations or in the United States as a refugee or asylee, or maybe they have DACA or a parole or a TPS, any kind of work authorization status, and they're here and they're working for you already.
Love it. I do that. I love it because we had a situation actually where we represented someone who is a DACA recipient, and we filed a immigrant petition for this DACA recipient. And so DACA is a little bit complex, but you can still sponsor this, a foreign national for lawful permanent resident. The key is whether they can adjust their status if they're in the U.S. If they're abroad, then as long as there's not any bar from them re-entering the U.S. or entering the U.S., then once you get the labor certification for them and they're able to go through the immigrant visa process, then they can enter the U.S. and be a lawful permanent resident based on the sponsorship.
So while it's a long solution, it's definitely a very flexible solution for employers to consider.
It is. It is a great solution for employers to consider if they're patient. I recall a couple of years ago, we helped an employer sponsor a construction worker from England, actually. And it could have been from any country, but the employer had a need for a construction worker, and there's many factors that you have to consider. There has to be an immigrant visa available too, and so we have to monitor that immigrant visas are available. But the employer sponsored for this construction worker to come over, and it took 2 years to bring this worker and his family over, but we eventually did it.
And when people consider the U.S. workforce, the great thing about the PERM process is we test the labor market. We make sure there's no U.S. workers available before we start taking a job off and offering it to a foreign national. And then there's also wage protections to make sure the wages are the same that we would pay U.S. workers.
Exactly.
So it's one of those really nice options for people.
It's very regulated by the Department of Labor, and the benefits, it goes both ways, to the foreign national and to the employer. There's a need. There's a need here in the U.S. for the workers. And so it's a category that I just think is really something that employers should take advantage of.
Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah.